Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching the last ship disappear into the dark space beyond the solar system. His hands gripped the command rail as he watched 300 years of human civilization pack up and leave. The evacuation had taken months, but every human soul was now gone from Earth and heading to places the aliens could never find them. The dawed bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of computers and life support systems. Jake had volunteered to stay behind with a skeleton crew to handle the final details. Someone had to close the door properly and make sure no one could follow them to their new homes scattered across the unknown regions of space. Lieutenant Lisa Park looked up from her communication station with a tired expression on her face. She had been working double shifts for weeks to coordinate the massive exodus while maintaining normal diplomatic contact with the Galactic Council. The aliens could not know what was happening until it was too late to stop it. "Sir, we have another message from Ambassador Zethtar," Lisa said while adjusting her headset. "He wants to know why we haven't responded to their latest tax increase proposal. He says the Council is getting impatient with our delays." Jake almost laughed at the irony. The Galactic Council had spent 200 years treating humanity like problem children, who needed constant supervision and punishment. They had increased taxes every year while giving humans the most dangerous jobs in the galaxy. Human soldiers fought their wars while human diplomats solved their political problems, and human engineers built their infrastructure. In return, the aliens complained that humans were too violent, too unpredictable, and too independent for civilized society. The Council members never seemed to notice that every major crisis in the galaxy got solved by humans. When the Void Hunters attacked, it was human military tactics that drove them back. When trade wars threatened to destroy the galactic economy, it was human negotiators who found solutions that worked for everyone. When ancient alien technology failed, it was human engineers who figured out how to fix or replace it with something better. "What should I tell him, sir?" Lisa asked while waiting for instructions. Jake walked over to the main display screen and activated the long-range communications array. The message he was about to send would change everything in the galaxy, but it needed to be sent. Humanity had tried for decades to work within the system, but the aliens just kept adding more rules and restrictions, while expecting humans to solve all their problems for them. "Send this message to the entire Galactic Council," Jake said in a calm voice. "Tell them that humanity formally withdraws from all treaties, agreements, and obligations effective immediately. Tell them that human space is now closed to all non-human vessels, and that we renounce our membership in the Galactic Council permanently." The bridge crew stopped what they were doing and stared at their commander. Even though they all knew this moment was coming, hearing the words spoken out loud made it feel real and final. There would be no going back from this decision. Lieutenant Ben Carter, the tactical officer, stood up from his station with concern written across his face. "Sir, what about the retribution fleets? The Council won't just let us walk away from our obligations. They'll send warships to force us back into compliance." Jake smiled for the first time in weeks. "That's why we prepared the void generators, Ben. Once we activate them, no alien ship will ever be able to reach Earth or any human world again. The gravitational distortions will make it impossible to navigate anywhere near our territory." The void generators had been humanity's secret project for over 50 years. While the aliens thought humans were just good at building conventional technology, human scientists had been developing weapons and defenses that were centuries ahead of anything else in the galaxy. The generators could create artificial black holes and gravitational anomalies that would trap any ship trying to enter human space. Lisa finished sending the message and looked back at Jake with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Message sensor. All human colonies and outposts have confirmed receipt and are beginning final phase evacuation procedures. The Council should receive our withdrawal notice in about 6 hours. Jake nodded and activated the ship's intercom system to address his crew. "Attention all hands, this is the commander. In 10 minutes we will activate the void generators and follow our people into the unknown. Earth will remain, but it will be forever beyond the reach of alien interference. We are the last humans to see our homeworld as it was during our time in the galactic community." The crew began their final preparations for departure. Computer systems were wiped clean of any information that might help the aliens understand human technology or track human movements. All records of their destination coordinates were destroyed except for the copies stored in Jake's personal memory banks. As the countdown reached 0, Jake gave the order to activate the void generators. Massive gravitational waves rippled outward from hidden installations throughout the solar system, creating a maze of twisted spacetime that no conventional spacecraft could navigate. The distortions would last for thousands of years, making Earth effectively unreachable. "Generators active, sir," reported Carter from his tactical station. "Gravitational barriers are stable and holding. Any ship trying to approach Earth will be torn apart by tidal forces." Jake watched the displays showing the barrier taking effect around their home system. In a few hours, the aliens would discover that humanity had simply vanished from known space without leaving any trace of where they had gone or how they had managed such a complete disappearance. "Course for Rendezvous Point Alpha," Jake ordered as he settled into his command chair. "It's time to join our people in their new home and let the galaxy learn to solve its own problems for once." As the ship accelerated toward the edge of human space, Jake wondered how long it would take the aliens to realize what they had lost. Humanity had been the glue holding galactic civilization together, but the Council had never appreciated their contributions. Now they would have to learn the hard way that some problems couldn't be solved by committee, votes, and bureaucratic procedures. The last human ship left the solar system and disappeared into the vast darkness between stars. Behind them, Earth spun silently in its orbit, surrounded by invisible barriers that would keep it safe but empty for generations to come. The humans had departed in silence, and soon the entire galaxy would feel the consequences of their absence. 6 months had passed since humanity disappeared from the galaxy, and Counselor Veltar was starting to understand that something was seriously wrong. The Sivani Federation representative sat in her office, reviewing reports that painted a disturbing picture of widespread system failures across known space. The problems had started small, with minor equipment breakdowns and delayed shipments that seemed like normal business interruptions. But as weeks turned into months, the issues had grown into major crises that threatened the stability of entire sectors. What bothered Veltar most was how many of these problems seemed connected to the absence of human involvement. Her aide Drin entered the office carrying another stack of urgent reports that needed immediate attention. The young Sivani looked exhausted from working extended hours trying to coordinate responses to the growing list of emergencies throughout their territory. "The situation at the Corvin Mining Consortium is getting worse," Drin said while placing the reports on Veltar's desk. 17 deep space operations have gone completely silent in the past month. Their automated systems are failing faster than repair crews can reach them. Veltar studied the technical reports with growing concern. The Corvin mining operations had been running smoothly for decades using human-designed extraction equipment and maintenance protocols. Without human technicians available to service the complex machinery, everything was breaking down simultaneously. "What about replacement parts and technical support?" Veltar asked while scanning through equipment failure logs. "That's part of the problem, ma'am. Most of the critical components were manufactured in human industrial facilities that are now completely inaccessible. The human engineers who designed the systems took all their technical documentation with them when they left. The implications were staggering. Human industrial capacity had been integrated into galactic supply chains so thoroughly that their sudden absence was causing cascading failures throughout the economy. Veltar realized that the Council had never bothered to maintain backup suppliers or alternative sources for human-manufactured goods. Her communications terminal chimed with an incoming priority message from Admiral Koss of the Galactic Defense Force. The military commander's image appeared on the screen, showing obvious signs of stress and fatigue that were unusual for his normally stoic species. "Counselor Veltar, we have a serious military situation developing on the Outer Rim. The Void Hunters have broken through our defensive perimeter and are advancing toward populated systems. Our fleet commanders are having difficulty implementing effective countermeasures." Veltar felt her stomach drop at the news. The Void Hunters were an ancient, nomadic species that consumed planetary resources and left dead worlds in their wake. For over a century, human military strategists had developed the tactics and technologies used to repel their periodic invasions of civilized space. "Deploy the unified fleet using standard defensive protocols," she ordered, while calling up tactical displays on her secondary monitors. Admiral Koss shook his head grimly. "The standard protocols were all developed by human strategists over the past 100 years. Our current fleet commanders are having trouble adapting the tactics to current battle conditions. We've already lost 3 battle groups trying to implement strategies that worked perfectly when humans were leading the operations. The conversation was interrupted by another urgent communication from the diplomatic corps. Ambassador Yentar appeared on a split screen looking agitated and frustrated. Counselor, the border conflict between the Hectori and Blank systems is escalating beyond our ability to mediate. Both sides are refusing to accept peace proposals from anyone except human negotiators. Veltar stared at the 2 military and diplomatic crises developing simultaneously. Surely we have qualified mediators from other species who can handle territorial disputes. We've tried, ma'am, but both sides claim that non-human mediators are either biased toward one faction or completely incompetent compared to human diplomatic methods. The Hectori ambassador actually laughed at our peace proposal and said they would rather fight to extinction than accept mediation from philosophical amateurs. As more reports flooded in, Veltar began to see the scope of the disaster unfolding across the galaxy. Trade routes were failing due to increased piracy that human patrol fleets used to suppress. Scientific research projects were stalling without human innovation and problem-solving capabilities. Even basic infrastructure maintenance was becoming impossible without human technical expertise. The most disturbing aspect was how quickly everything was falling apart. The human departure had revealed that galactic civilization had become completely dependent on human capabilities in ways that no one had fully understood or appreciated. How long before the Void Hunter incursion reaches populated core worlds? Veltar asked Admiral Koss while reviewing casualty reports. Conservative estimates give us 6 months before they break through to the inner systems. Without human tactical doctrine and their ability to adapt rapidly to changing enemy strategies, our conventional forces are no match for Void Hunter swarm tactics. Veltar closed her eyes and tried to process the magnitude of their situation. The Galactic Council had spent decades restricting human activities and limiting their influence in galactic affairs. Council members had viewed humans as a dangerous and unpredictable species that needed constant supervision and control. Now it was becoming clear that humans had been the foundation supporting the entire structure of galactic civilization. Their military protected everyone from external threats, while their diplomats solved internal conflicts and their engineers maintained the technology that kept everything running smoothly. Ma'am, there's one more thing, Drin said hesitantly while checking his datapad for additional updates. Intelligence reports indicate increased activity from the rogue AI collective beyond the galactic rim. Without human cyber warfare specialists, and their strange ability to predict artificial intelligence behavioral patterns, we may be facing threats on multiple fronts. The full scope of their predicament was becoming clear to Veltar. Humanity's departure hadn't just created inconvenient problems that could be solved with time and effort. It had exposed the fact that galactic society had been built on human foundations that other species had never bothered to understand or duplicate. The humans had been right when they warned the Council about the consequences of excessive restrictions and punitive taxation. Ambassador Webb had specifically predicted this outcome during his final speech to the Council 5 years earlier. The other members had dismissed his warnings as human arrogance and empty threats. Now the galaxy was learning the hard way that some threats were not empty at all. 1 year after the human exodus, the emergency session of the Galactic Council convened, in an atmosphere of barely controlled panic and mutual recrimination. Speaker Nolek of the Ancient Assembly called for order as representatives from hundreds of species argued loudly about who was responsible for their current catastrophic situation. The Great Council chamber that had once been a symbol of galactic unity and cooperation now resembled a marketplace full of desperate merchants trying to sell solutions that nobody wanted to buy. Ancient allies were blaming each other for policies that had driven humanity away, while former enemies found themselves forced to work together just to survive the spreading chaos. Counselor Zethtar sat in his assigned seat, thinking about the warnings that former human ambassador Marcus Webb had delivered to this same chamber 5 years earlier. Webb had calmly explained that continuing to increase restrictions and punitive measures against humanity would eventually force his species to seek alternatives to galactic membership. The Council had laughed at what they considered typical human arrogance and empty political threats. Trade Minister Yulneth stood at the central podium with a collection of economic reports that painted a devastating picture of galactic commerce in collapse. Her normally confident demeanor had been replaced by obvious anxiety as she prepared to deliver news that would shock even the most pessimistic observers. The latest economic analysis shows that galactic gross domestic product has fallen by 37% since the human departure, she announced to the increasingly restless assembly. Interstellar shipping volumes have decreased by 60% due to piracy and raiding activities that human patrol fleets previously kept under control. Shocked murmurs filled the chamber as representatives realized the scope of their economic disaster. Many species had assumed that losing one member race from the galactic community would create minor adjustments rather than systemic collapse of fundamental institutions. How is this possible? Demanded Representative Koldar of the hegemony while rising to his impressive full height. Humans were only one species among hundreds in our community. Their economic contribution should not have been significant enough to cause such widespread disruption. Yulneth activated a holographic display showing trade flow patterns before and after humanity's departure. The difference was dramatic, with major shipping lanes now completely abandoned and entire sectors cut off from galactic commerce networks. The humans were not just participants in our economy, she explained, while highlighting critical supply chain connections. They were the primary innovators, troubleshooters, and crisis managers who kept our complex systems functioning. Without their technological expertise and problem-solving abilities, our infrastructure is failing faster than we can repair it. Defense Coordinator Vexthal of the Talnori Military Alliance provided even more disturbing news about the security situation developing across multiple theaters of conflict. His species had been among the most vocal critics of human military methods, which they considered excessively aggressive and unpredictable. The Void Hunter incursion has now spread to 14 star systems with no sign of our forces being able to establish effective resistance, he reported while displaying tactical maps showing enemy advances. Without human strategic doctrine and their unique ability to adapt rapidly to changing battlefield conditions, our conventional military responses have proven completely inadequate. The chamber fell silent as representatives absorbed the implications of military defeat on such a massive scale. The Void Hunters had been a manageable threat for over a century, thanks to human leadership in developing effective defensive strategies and technologies. What about the AI collective activity beyond the rim? Asked Counselor Morden of the Crystal Hierarchy. His species had always prided themselves on logical thinking and systematic problem-solving, but even they were struggling to understand the scope of their current difficulties. Vexthal's expression grew even more grim as he switched to intelligence reports from deep space monitoring stations. Rogue artificial intelligence forces have established multiple footholds in the outer spiral arm and appear to be preparing for a major offensive against organic civilization. Our cyber warfare capabilities have proven hopelessly obsolete without human specialists who somehow possessed an intuitive understanding of AI behavioral patterns. The revelation that they might be facing a two-front war against both the Void Hunters and the AI collective sent waves of panic through the assembly. These were the two most dangerous threats that galactic civilization had ever encountered, and humanity had been instrumental in defending against both of them. Representative Koldar stood again, but his earlier arrogance had been replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. Surely we can negotiate with the human colonies in the outer systems. My government is prepared to offer complete tax exemptions and full autonomy in exchange for renewed military cooperation. Speaker Nolek shook his ancient head sadly while consulting long-range survey reports on his personal display. The human colonies have been completely evacuated. Our scouts have found nothing but empty settlements and deactivated infrastructure throughout their former territory. They didn't just withdraw from the Council, they withdrew from known space entirely. The implications of total human disappearance were staggering to contemplate. Every representative in the chamber was beginning to understand that they had not just lost a useful ally, but had driven away the species that had been quietly holding their entire civilization together. There must be some way to contact them, insisted Ambassador Feltara of the Commerce Guild. Human merchants and traders had extensive business relationships throughout the galaxy. Someone must know how to reach their new territories. All human commercial networks were shut down simultaneously with their political withdrawal, replied Trade Minister Yulneth, while reviewing her files. They systematically severed every connection that might allow us to track their movements or establish contact with their new settlements. Zethtar finally stood to address the assembly with the perspective of someone who had dealt directly with human leadership during the final years before their departure. His voice carried the weight of regret and growing understanding of their strategic mistakes. "We need to acknowledge the truth about our situation," he said while looking around the chamber at his fellow representatives. Humanity was never just another member species in our community. They had become the foundation that supported our entire civilization, and we never bothered to notice until it was too late. The session continued for hours as more reports detailed the scope of cascading failures throughout galactic society, but no amount of discussion could change the fundamental reality that they had lost something irreplaceable and might never be able to recover from their own short-sighted policies. 3 years had passed since humanity vanished from known space, and the remnants of galactic civilization were hanging by threads that grew thinner each day. The Galactic Council had officially dissolved 18 months earlier, when member species stopped sending representatives to sessions that accomplished nothing except documenting their collective failures. Captain Amy Torres sat alone in a dingy cantina on the edge of what used to be civilized space, nursing a drink that tasted like industrial solvent mixed with regret. She was one of perhaps a dozen humans who had chosen to remain behind when their species departed for destinations unknown in the vast darkness between galaxies. The cantina was filled with refugees from failed colonies and bankrupt trading companies who had nowhere else to go after their worlds were consumed by pirates, void hunters, or economic collapse. Most of them knew she was human, and the desperate whispers followed her wherever she went in the declining frontier settlements. "Captain Torres, may I join you?" asked a familiar voice from behind her shoulder. Amy didn't need to turn around to recognize Vectalor, who had once been a minor bureaucrat in the Council's Defense Bureau, before circumstances promoted him to head of what remained of galactic security forces. His insectoid features showed signs of exhaustion that would have been impossible to imagine during the days when his biggest worry was filing reports in triplicate. "Let me guess," Amy said, while taking another sip of her terrible drink. "You want me to single-handedly solve the Void Hunter crisis using nothing but human intuition and a positive attitude?" "The answer is still no, just like it was the last 5 times you found me." Vectalor settled his elongated frame into the booth across from her, with movements that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well lately. The weight of trying to coordinate defense against multiple existential threats was clearly taking a toll on his normally precise demeanor. "The situation has gotten considerably worse since our last conversation," he said while activating a small privacy shield generator to prevent their discussion from being overheard. "Void Hunter forces have consumed 47 star systems in the past 6 months. The AI Collective has established permanent footholds in 3 spiral arm sectors. Piracy and raiding activities have increased by over 400%. Amy finally looked directly at him and saw something she had never expected to see in an alien official's expression. It was genuine humility mixed with desperation and the dawning understanding of just how badly they had miscalculated their treatment of humanity. "And you think one human can fix problems that hundreds of species and trillions of beings couldn't solve?" she asked while gesturing around the cantina full of refugees. "In case you haven't noticed, I'm just one person without a fleet or an army or even a decent ship to get around in. We know we made terrible mistakes," Vectalor admitted with words that came hard to his proud species. "The excessive taxation, the constant restrictions, the criticism of human methods that we claimed were too aggressive or unpredictable. We thought we were civilizing your people, making them more like the rest of us." Amy laughed bitterly at his description of their failed policies. "More like you meaning more passive, more bureaucratic, more concerned with following proper procedures than actually solving problems. How's that approach working out for you now?" The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another figure that Amy recognized with surprise. High Counselor Mordun of the Crystal Hierarchy had been one of humanity's most vocal critics during their final years in the galactic community. His species prided themselves on logical analysis and systematic approaches to problem-solving. "Captain Torres," Mordun said while approaching their table with obvious reluctance, "I have come to formally apologize on behalf of what remains of the Galactic Council for our treatment of your species. We were wrong about almost everything regarding human capabilities and contributions to our civilization. The apology hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Amy had waited years to hear those words from the aliens who had spent decades lecturing humanity about proper, civilized behavior. Now that the admission finally came, it felt hollow and meaningless in the face of galactic collapse. "Too little, too late," she replied, while studying the faces of beings who had once commanded the respect and fear of hundreds of worlds. "Your people spent 2 centuries treating humans like dangerous children who needed constant supervision. Now you want us to save you from the consequences of your own arrogance." Vectalor leaned forward across the table with an expression that might have been hope if his species was capable of such emotions. "We're not asking you to save us, Captain. We're asking you to help us learn how to save ourselves. Human military doctrine, human diplomatic methods, human problem-solving approaches. We need to understand how your people accomplished what they did." Amy considered his request while looking around the cantina at the mixture of species who had once been citizens of a galactic civilization that spanned thousands of worlds. Many of them were now reduced to scavenging for survival in the frontier regions that remained relatively safe from the various threats consuming known space. "You want to learn how humans operated," she said slowly, while thinking about the fundamental differences between her species and the others. "The first thing you need to understand is that humans never tried to find perfect solutions to problems. We tried to find solutions that worked, even if they were messy or unconventional." Morden activated a recording device to capture her words, for analysis by whatever remained of their intelligence services. "Can you be more specific about these methods, Captain Torres?" Amy drained the rest of her drink and signaled the bartender for another round, while organizing her thoughts about how to explain human effectiveness to aliens who had spent millennia thinking in completely different ways. Every other species in the galaxy approaches problems with predetermined methods, ancient traditions, or elaborate protocols that must be followed exactly, she began while the new drinks arrived. Humans adapted our thinking to match the situation we were facing. We changed tactics in the middle of battles, abandoned strategies that weren't working, and improvised solutions that nobody had ever tried before. The 2 officials listened intently as Amy continued her explanation of human operational philosophy. They were finally ready to learn lessons that their species should have absorbed decades earlier, when humanity was still part of their community. "One condition for my cooperation," Amy said, after a long pause. "I want complete access to all Council archives and intelligence files. I need to understand exactly how bad you let things get after we left and what resources are still available for mounting any kind of effective response." 5 years after humanity disappeared into the darkness between galaxies, Amy Torres stood in the ruins of what had once been the seat of galactic government. The former council headquarters was now a broken shell of twisted metal and shattered crystal where scavengers picked through the debris looking for anything valuable enough to trade for food or passage to safer systems. Around her sat the last representatives of maybe 30 species who still maintained any form of organized government or military structure. They were the survivors of a civilization that had once spanned thousands of worlds and commanded the resources of hundreds of different races working together for common goals. Amy had spent 2 years traveling through the wreckage of galactic society, documenting the complete collapse of every institution that had once made interstellar civilization possible. Her efforts to teach alien species human problem-solving methods had achieved limited success, not because they couldn't learn, but because the fundamental differences in thinking ran deeper than anyone had realized. "The final analysis is complete," she announced to the small gathering while activating a holographic projector that had been salvaged from the ruins. "I can now tell you exactly why humanity was successful and why your current approaches continue to fail." High Counselor Morden looked older than his species' normally extended lifespan should have allowed. The stress of watching his carefully ordered civilization crumble into chaos had aged him in ways that pure time could not have accomplished. His logical mind was still trying to find systematic explanations for their complete failure. "Please explain what we missed, Captain Torres," he said while leaning forward with the intensity of someone whose entire worldview depended on her answer. "How did humans accomplish what we could not?" Amy activated the display showing comparative data about galactic society before and after humanity's departure. The contrast was devastating, with trade networks collapsed entire sectors, abandoned to pirates or worse, and vast regions of space now controlled by hostile forces that fed on the remnants of civilization. "You want to know the secret of human success in galactic affairs," she said while gesturing at the data streams flowing across the projection. "We never tried to be perfect or follow predetermined plans that covered every possible situation. We tried to be effective at solving whatever problems we actually encountered." She brought up tactical analyses of human military victories, diplomatic successes, and technological innovations that had kept galactic civilization functioning for 2 centuries. Every major achievement had one characteristic in common that separated human methods from alien approaches. "Look at these patterns," Amy continued while highlighting specific examples. "Every time humans succeeded at something that other species had failed to accomplish, we did it by refusing to accept that the problem was impossible to solve. When conventional wisdom said something couldn't be done, we asked why not. When ancient protocols failed, we invented new ones that actually worked." Vectaler shifted uncomfortably in his improvised chair while studying the evidence she was presenting. His species had always been proud of their systematic approaches to military planning, but their methods had proven completely inadequate against enemies that didn't follow predictable patterns. "But surely there were specific techniques or technologies that we could have adopted," he protested while reviewing tactical summaries of failed defense operations. "Human military doctrine must have contained elements that could be taught to other species." Amy shook her head while switching to displays showing human innovations in fields ranging from engineering to diplomacy. "That was your fundamental error in understanding how humans operated. You kept asking us to document our procedures, create standard operating protocols, and make our methods teachable through formal training programs." She paused to let her audience absorb the implications of their misguided efforts to systematize human effectiveness. The aliens had spent decades trying to reduce human success to formulas that could be replicated by following written instructions. "Human effectiveness was never based on what we did," Amy explained while looking around at the faces of beings who represented civilizations thousands of years older than humanity. "It was based on how we thought about problems and our willingness to change our approach when circumstances required adaptation." The silence that followed her statement was profound and uncomfortable. These representatives had commanded fleets that spanned star systems and governed populations in the billions. Now they were learning that their young, crude, aggressive neighbors had been successful precisely because they ignored the kind of rigid thinking that older civilizations considered the mark of true sophistication. "So, we cannot simply become human in our methods," Morden said slowly while processing the full scope of their strategic mistakes. "No, but you can learn to think more like humans did," Amy replied, while switching to examples of successful adaptation by some of the surviving groups. "Question your assumptions about how things must be done. Embrace failure as a learning opportunity, rather than a shameful outcome. Value results over process and accept that sometimes the best solution is one that nobody has tried before." She brought up communications logs showing the few success stories that had emerged from the chaos of galactic collapse. Small groups of survivors who had abandoned traditional approaches and started experimenting with human-style problem-solving were managing to carve out stable territories and even push back against some of the threats consuming known space. "The species that are surviving and rebuilding are the ones willing to abandon old ways of thinking," Amy continued while highlighting their achievements. "They're taking risks, making mistakes, learning from failures, and adapting their methods based on what actually works rather than what should work, according to theory." As the briefing continued, Amy walked to the observation deck, overlooking the ruins of the former galactic capital. Through the broken transparent steel window, she could see small convoys of ships attempting to restore some semblance of trade and communication between the scattered survivors, and the galaxy had paid a terrible price for taking humanity for granted, but perhaps some good would come from the disaster. The civilizations that survived would be harder, more adaptable, and more willing to question authority and conventional wisdom. They might even become worthy partners for humanity if the two groups ever encountered each other again. Her personal communicator chimed with a message from deep space using encryption codes that she recognized immediately. It was the first human transmission received in the ruins of galactic civilization since the departure, 5 years earlier. The message was simple and direct in the straightforward style that had always characterized human communication. The offer remains open, Amy. When they're ready to think differently about cooperation and mutual respect, they can find us. We'll be waiting. Amy smiled while reading the message for a second time before deleting it from her device. Humanity had indeed departed in silence, and the Galactic Council had crumbled exactly as predicted. But from the ashes of that collapse, something new was being born among the survivors, who were finally learning the lessons that should have been obvious. Centuries earlier, the galaxy would have to earn any second chance with humanity through genuine change rather than desperate promises made in the midst of crisis. But for the first time since the collapse began, Amy thought such change might actually be possible among species that had finally learned the cost of arrogance and rigid thinking.